What replaced real food didn't arrive overnight. It came in small shifts. A substitution here, a reformulation there. Most of it happened in kitchens that weren't your own. By the time anyone thought to ask what had changed, the old version was already gone. This wasn't about a single ingredient. It was about a category of products that stopped resembling the things they were named after. Cheese that required no refrigeration, bread that lasted weeks without mold, juice that had never seen fruit, meat that had been restructured from parts no one used to eat. At the time, this was considered progress. The language used to sell these products didn't hide what they were, it celebrated it. Processed wasn't a warning, it was a feature. It meant modern, it meant safe, it meant someone else had done the work for you. And for a generation of families, that mattered more than anything else. The shift began in earnest during the 1960s and accelerated through the 1980s. This was when the industrial food system reached full scale. Factories that once produced for armies now produced for suburbs. The supply chain that fed soldiers during wartime was retooled to feed families during peacetime. The logic was the same: efficiency, shelf life, cost reduction. But the product was different. What had been designed for short-term survival in extreme conditions was now being marketed as everyday nutrition. And because it was cheaper, faster, and more convenient than cooking from scratch, it became normal. School cafeterias adopted it. Hospitals adopted it. Nursing homes adopted it. Anywhere large numbers of people needed to be fed quickly and cheaply, these products filled the gap. Most people didn't question it. The brands were familiar, the packaging was bright and clean, the messaging was optimistic, and the taste, for children especially, was engineered to be immediately satisfying in a way that whole foods often weren't. Sugar, salt, and fat were no longer balanced by texture, fiber, or bitterness. They were amplified, isolated, delivered in ratios that didn't exist in nature. The goal wasn't to mimic real food, it was to improve on it, to remove the parts that required chewing, waiting, or acquired taste, to create something that could be consumed quickly, enjoyed instantly, and craved repeatedly. And it worked. Most people never noticed this at the time. There was no announcement, no public debate, no moment when families sat down and decided to stop eating the way their grandparents had. It happened incrementally, one product at a time, one meal replacement at a time. The grocery store changed. Entire aisles that used to hold flour, sugar, and canned vegetables were now filled with boxed dinners, frozen entrees, and snack packs. The center of the store grew. The perimeter shrank. Cooking from scratch didn't disappear, but it became optional. Something you did on special occasions, or when you had extra time, or when you were trying to impress someone. For everyday life, there was a faster way. And because everyone else was doing it, it didn't feel like a compromise. It felt like adaptation, like keeping up. The marketing didn't just sell convenience, it sold competence. A good mother was someone who could feed her family quickly and without stress. A responsible adult was someone who didn't waste time on unnecessary labor. The message was clear. Cooking wasn't a skill, it was a burden, and the modern world had found a way to lift it. Television reinforced this. Commercials showed happy families gathered around tables eating meals that came from boxes and cans. No one was sweating over a stove. No one was washing dishes. The mother smiled. The children smiled. The father smiled. The product was the solution. The family was the proof. And if you weren't using these products, the implication was that you were making life harder than it needed to be, that you were stuck in the past, that you didn't understand progress. This wasn't discussed openly. It didn't need to be. The shift was already happening. The infrastructure was already in place. The choices were already made. The real impact appeared years later. Not in immediate illness, not in sudden crisis, but in patterns, in behaviors, in the way children began to relate to food. Taste preferences became narrower. Foods that required bitterness, sourness, or complexity were rejected. Vegetables that didn't come in chip form or coated in ranch dressing were left untouched. Whole grains felt strange. Water tasted boring. The palate adapted to what it was given, and what it was given was designed to be as easy as possible to like. This wasn't accidental. Food scientists understood that children were a long-term market, that preferences formed early were preferences that lasted, that a child who grew up on processed snacks would become an adult who craved them. The industry called this creating brand loyalty, but what it really created was dependency. Not in the medical sense, not in the way addiction is typically defined, but in the way that anything engineered to maximize pleasure and minimize effort becomes hard to walk away from. And by the time consequences were visible, habits were already set. The consequences weren't just individual, they were social. Families stopped eating together, not because they didn't want to, but because there was no longer a reason to. If everyone could microwave their own meal, why coordinate schedules? Why wait? The dinner table, which had once been a place of shared experience, became optional. And when it did happen, the food on it was often the same processed products everyone would have eaten alone. The ritual remained, the substance didn't. And because this happened gradually, no one noticed the loss. There was no before and after comparison, just a slow drift toward isolation, even within the same house. Children grew up not knowing what fresh bread smelled like, not knowing what it felt like to peel an orange or crack an egg, not knowing that food could come from anywhere other than a package. Cooking became something you watched on television, not something you did. And the generation that grew up this way had no model for anything different. This wasn't a failure of individuals, it was a structural inevitability. The system wasn't designed to prioritize nutrition, it was designed to prioritize profit, scalability, and convenience. And it succeeded on every one of those terms. Food companies did exactly what they were built to do. They found cheaper ingredients, they streamlined production, they extended shelf life, they increased consumption. And they did it with the full support of regulators, advertisers, and public health officials who believed that industrial food was the solution to hunger, not a new kind of problem. No one was lying. No one was hiding the ingredients. The information was on the label. The process was legal. The products were approved. But the labels didn't explain what those ingredients did when combined in specific ratios and consumed daily for years. And the approval process didn't test for that either. It tested for safety in isolation, not for the cumulative effect of an entire diet built from the same processed base. And by the time researchers began to notice patterns, rising rates of obesity, metabolic disorders, behavioral changes, the system was already too big to reverse. The infrastructure was in place, the jobs depended on it, the economy depended on it, and the population had already adapted their expectations, their budgets, and their routines around it. To go back would have required dismantling everything that had been built, and no one was willing to do that. So the products stayed and multiplied. Low-fat versions, sugar-free versions, organic versions, versions for children, versions for athletes, versions for people who wanted to feel like they were making a better choice without actually changing what they ate. The system didn't resist criticism. It absorbed it. It rebranded. It added new labels. It created new subcategories. But the core didn't change. The food was still engineered, still optimized, still designed to be consumed in quantities that exceeded hunger. And the families who relied on it were still making decisions within a structure that had already decided for them. What happened in homes wasn't separate from what happened in schools, hospitals, workplaces, and care facilities. It was the same system operating at every level. Children ate processed food for breakfast at home, processed food for lunch at school, and processed food for dinner back at home. The cycle repeated daily. The variety was an illusion. The base was always the same. And because it was everywhere, it became invisible. You couldn't opt out without opting out of convenience entirely, without accepting that you would spend more time, more money, and more effort on something most people had decided wasn't worth it. The choice wasn't really a choice. It was a test of how much friction you were willing to tolerate. And most people, reasonably, chose the path that didn't require them to fight the entire system just to eat. The families who did resist faced a different set of challenges. Whole foods cost more. They spoiled faster. They required knowledge that hadn't been passed down. Recipes that used to be common were now obscure. Techniques that used to be taught were now optional skills. And even when families committed to cooking from scratch, they were still operating within the same industrialized food supply. The vegetables were grown for yield, not flavor. The meat was raised for speed, not quality. The dairy was processed for consistency, not nutrition. The ingredients themselves had changed. So even the people who thought they were eating real food were often eating a version that had been shaped by the same pressures as the processed products they were trying to avoid. The system didn't just change what people ate. It changed what was available to eat. And this wasn't the only change. The same logic that transformed food was applied to other parts of daily life: clothing, furniture, toys, entertainment, education. Anything that could be mass-produced, standardized, and sold at scale was. Anything that required time, skill, or individuality was pushed to the margins. The shift wasn't just nutritional, it was cultural. And the generation that grew up inside it inherited a world where convenience was assumed, where craft was rare, and where the idea of making something yourself, whether food or anything else, felt like a luxury, not a necessity. Similar decisions followed.